I recognize myself for some questions and recognize y'all for the answers. It's important that we, as you have all said, understand as Americans the consequences of doing nothing. The disappearance of elephants, it's hard to imagine that that would happen in this world, but it could. As Mr. Cruden has said, in our lifetime, in our kids' lifetime, the only place they're going to see an elephant is in a Disney cartoon, maybe, because there won't be any. And rhinos are in worse shape, and tigers as well. I want to focus my questions on terrorism, terrorist groups, poaching, where they sell these items, and the money that is involved. Do we have any idea how many terrorist organizations are involved in Africa in the poaching business? Ambassador?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an illicit trade by its very nature, so of course it's something that it's very difficult for us to have very firm knowledge about. There's no question that the shadowy and adaptive financial flows that fund illicit crime and illicit activities are at play. We do have evidence that militant groups such as the Lord's Resistance Army and Janjaweed benefit substantially from the legal trade in wildlife. Some terrorist entities we believe are benefiting, but the details are truly sketchy. By how much, it's very hard for us to know.
I understand that in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, 150 park rangers have been killed since 2004, and according to the International Ranger Federation, worldwide park rangers, 2 are killed every week that are protecting these parks where all these animals are. It seems to me that the Lord's Resistance Army, which you mentioned, is using Garamba National Park in the Democratic Republic of the Congo as a base of operations. What can you say a little more specific about the connections between the LRA and the ivory trade as a source of its financing?
I can say that the Lord's Resistance Army is deriving significant revenue from poaching and illegal trade in elephant, and we have seen these activities intensify over the last 2 years.
Under current law, if the U.S. government can deny a foreigner a visa if they're convicted of human trafficking, terrorist activity, violations of religious freedom, do you think we should add wildlife trafficking to that list, Ambassador?
It is something that we could consider. I think part of what we need to be doing is, as you said very clearly in your statement, Mr. Chairman, is that we really need to understand what's going on a little, in better and in more depth, and that is something that I think the National Wildlife Strategy and the task force has really done. We have seen the strategy and the whole of government approach truly elevate the attention that the intelligence community is giving this problem. We're being able to identify the gaps in what our knowledge is and where we need to focus that. And I think as that all becomes clearer, we will be in a better position to really understand if that kind of a step is what makes the most sense at this time.
If U.S. law enforcement suspects a foreign-owned and operated outfitter of violating wildlife laws in a foreign country, and the foreign country refuses to arrest or prosecute the owners and operators, does the United States have any enforcement actions such as denying or freezing assets? Mr. Cruden, can we do anything about that?
You know, when we're bringing our prosecutions, we're doing it fundamentally under the Lacey Act and the Endangered Species Act. So under the Lacey Act, where we actually do look at violations of host country laws, but we're looking at that with a nexus to us. They're violating the laws, and they're coming to the United States. And so that is the connection that we have right now. And by the way, the Lacey Act is, in fact, a model for the rest of the world. There, in country after country that we're talking to, they're talking about whether or not they would emulate something like the Lacey Act. So I do not want to minimize its importance right now, but it does require that nexus to the United States before we would have the ability to prosecute.
And by nexus, you mean what?
by coming into the United States. You're importing or importing something into or exporting something out of the United States.
We deal with international drug cartels. And my understanding is they don't have to physically be on the United States land to go and prosecute them if the money chain comes into the U.S. Is that right or not?
I believe that you're correct. It's still the same issue that there has to be some connection to the United States. But by the way, under drug trafficking laws, those are a predicate offense to money laundering, an ability we really don't have under wildlife trafficking laws. So drug laws are in fact more powerful than some of our wildlife trafficking offenses, which is why I brought that up in my testimony, that was something else that we would be interested in exploring with you.
So if I understand you correctly, if we could balance the enforcement with using, let's use the international drug trafficking, if we could have international wildlife trafficking be treated the same way to some extent for us, jurisdiction, enforcement, would you think that would help?
Similar to what we have for drug trafficking.
Similar to what we have for drug trafficking. Might kind of merge the laws that make the laws very similar.
I believe very clearly that wildlife trafficking, as you have stated, is a very serious crime similar to drug trafficking, and therefore we should be able to look at that and gain from that experience and benefit, and that might actually help us strengthen some of our laws. So I agree with you.
And the same would be true of different terrorism laws because of the fact that these terrorist groups use the money to commit terror. Maybe Congress should explore expanding the trafficking issue because, as you have all said, this is a real problem, and it's the disappearance of certain wildlife soon if something is not done very quickly and effectively. Let me ask one more question, then I'm going to yield to the ranking member for his questions. What countries are the worst offenders as far as cooperating and preventing wildlife trafficking in their country? Nobody wants to say? Well, I'll ask you one specific. How about Tanzania? Is Tanzania doing a good job protecting the wildlife in their parks?
I think the facts, there's an old saying about res ipsa loquitur. I mean, the issue here is that we know that that recent data coming out of Tanzania from the Pan-African Elephant Survey shows that elephants are suffering enormous mortality in Tanzania and in their national parks, in the areas of the Selous and in the Ruaha. They have a terrible poaching problem. And they are, at least at this point, from what we can tell, not able to control it. So they are working. We give them credit for engaging in this, and we are working with them. I mean, our ambassador in Tanzania is very much engaged in working with the government officials there, including providing assistance and training from AFRICOM. I mean, we're doing many things we can to try to strengthen their capacity, but they face an enormous challenge. Right now, I mean, as you may know, a year ago, the Fish and Wildlife Service concluded it could not allow the import of sport hunting trophies of elephants from Tanzania because we could not conclude that their management of the populations in Tanzania were stable and sustaining. And so all of those, I think, indicate that that's a country with serious challenges.
And the biggest problem is in Central Africa and in South Africa. Is that a fair statement of where the poaching is taking place? Mr. Cruden, you nodded, so I'll ask you.
I wanted to nod, and I wanted to remember I said in my opening statement that some of my comments are affected by what African leaders said. African leaders that I talked to talked about Tanzania as a transshipment place. And your map that you gave us shows that. So not only do they have a problem, but it's a place where it goes to other places. They also told us that they do go not directly to places like China or Vietnam, because if you put China or Vietnam on your manifest, you're more likely to get checked at the customs office. So they put intermediary places like Malaysia or Philippines as a place that makes it less likely then that their illegal exportation of things like ivory will get looked at. So it isn't, so I agree with everything that Mr. Dreyer said, but I also think it's relevant as a transshipment place as well in this whole concept of organized crime.
All right, thank you. Mr. Keating?